We've got another windy race here at Grafham on a Sunday. This is same from the Father versus Son race a few weeks ago. Same weekend, but this was before everyone else decided, you know what, they knew better than this and decided to head in. However, I decided, 3 races was probably a good idea. Now, we've got a few other boats here. We've got a Hadron H2. I think there might have been a D0, but I might be making that up. And there was a bunch of lasers as well in the earlier start. So you won't see much of the slower boats on this start, hopefully, but you will see a bunch of the lasers. Now, I'm heading down the line quite a lot here, sort of running out of space a little bit. I just can't get the boat to stop with its fully battened main. But luckily, line's pretty long and there aren't that many boats. So I'm able to start accelerating pretty early on, so I can start pointing up as soon as we hit that go. There you go, nice. Now, it's pretty windy at this point, pretty lumpy as well at this bottom end for a reservoir, so it's still just about managing that risk. It's looking pretty good. If we look ahead, we can see some of the lasers who haven't tacked yet, so I sort of used them as a bit of a baseline to help me figure out where the ley line is. However, throughout the whole day, every single time I tacked, thinking I was on the ley line, I always got headed every time, so lesson learnt. If you're going towards the trees, you're probably going to get headed. That's a good lesson for me to learn. But yeah, decided it was definitely going to be quicker going left rather than heading right towards the trees, especially on the southern bank. There's quite a lot of tall trees by the Fisherman's Lodge and the Cat Park, so you've got to bear that in mind. The other thing to bear in mind as well is the village of Perry, which is which you drive through to get to Grafham Water, is higher than the sailing club, because once upon a time the reservoir, well, it wasn't a reservoir, it had a road that went through it to get to Grafham, which is on the north side, which is actually one of our slipways, ironically. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but because of that, it means that the reservoir is a little bit lower, especially when the water level's low, which is not at the moment. It's actually very good. But it does mean that you can get some very weird shifts and stuff from the south side and the north side too, but the north side the hills are a little bit more noticeable and you can see the gaps, whereas the south side, it's harder to notice because it kind of gradually goes up. And if anyone's ever used the slipways at Grafham, you know how steep they are and how long they are, and they never feel like they quite finish. But yeah, we're going quite nicely here, I'd say. I'm very happy with the sort of speed I'm heading up pretty well. Sadly, the other 600 was out in the first race. Something happened with their strop, so they had to head in. It was having a nice little fight with them in the first race. So hopefully we'll get some more club racing, 600 racing coming in the future. But yeah, as you can see here, I am quite comfortable just playing the main, steering the boat through the gusts and the shifts, and just generally trying to optimize for speed. And you'll actually see this a lot once I tack, is navigating through the lasers. I focus on just going quickly. Now that tack wasn't too bad in the entry. I unhooked on the rack, which is pretty good, but I should have definitely turned once I was happy I was unhooked and then started crossing the boat, so then I would have been wouldn't have had that issue where the boat just sort of stops. There's the Hadron who's crossing behind, so I've made a bit of a lead on them. The EPS was obviously not able to point like the previous video I did with the EPS, so I was able to make a good ground on them. Now this tack's difficult because it's shifty the closer you get to the shore. You can see some of the lasers are a little bit to the lure to me, but as you can see here, I'm just trying to get comfortable, just trying to get into a groove, which is easier said than done. And as you can see here, big gust, but I'm actually nudged off a few degrees just to aim for the speed, and it's working. That's the thing. The VMG is probably still pretty good, even though I've dropped off 5 degrees. So it's not all disaster, but definitely could do with getting the boat a little flatter. I can't tell if my trapeze is a little higher on this side, and as a result, I'm just I'm trying to do what I was doing on the starboard tack, but it's just not quite working. But yeah, as you can see, I'm going quite nicely now, which is nice, but I am going to start running into some of those issues I previously discussed as I get close to the Cat Park. Now, the course we were doing was a big triangle. We were going to X as our windward mark, which is right on the shore next to the slipways. It does mean on the starboard ley line, you will be going past the Cat Park where the tall trees are, so that is something to bear in mind. Then we were heading over to, I want to say Z, which is a relatively new mark for Grafham, and then jibing at Z and heading down to M, which was the bottom mark right near the committee boat. Now, if you played it right, you could C to Z was, sorry, X to Z was a pretty good reach, quite broad, whereas it's definitely a run from Z to M. As you can see here, I'm having to sort of go a little bit lower. I'm not really trapezing as flat as I'd like, but I'm just focusing on playing that boat. My upper body strength is definitely not as good as it used to be, and so I'm just kind of working with what I have. I did rake back a little bit for this day, so on my shroud adjusters, I typically go up and down one hull depending on the conditions. If it's the technical term is, if it's honking, then go down a hole, otherwise go up a hole. Now, I normally run my mast rake a little bit more upright than most, as I'm a little on the heavier side than most 600 sailors. This just allows me to point quite well, which means that some of the sort of marginal trapezing weather, I normally can outpoint people without the pinching. Right, we're getting pretty close to the cat park now. You can see some of those trees, even though it's winter and half of them haven't got any leaves, but they're still just as shifty, as you can imagine. That was actually a pretty nice tack, to be honest, for a windy day, apart from dropping the main sheet, but to be honest, I kind of needed to because I wasn't ready to hook on. But the key thing is the boat's upright, which is quick. So, X is that red one ahead. We can see some of the lasers attacking around it. They have I think it's a 2-minute head start on us, so not too bad. And it's really challenging at this top end because it's gusty, but the gusts are sort of going over our head a little bit. So it sort of calms down, but I'm sort of waiting for the next one to hit as I'm trying to go past that 4.7, who ended up winning the laser race in the end. So there's the first gust. I'm using my new technique I've learned from the Datchet Flyer as well as from sailing just before Christmas, and I'll actually have a video on that soon. I keep ramming my foot into the back corner of the racks there, as you can see. It works quite well, actually. What it allows me to do is sort of kind of acts like a foot strap, especially because when you're on that back corner, it doesn't really make a huge difference whether you have your foot on the rack or not, and not having it on the rack is better for stability, because at that point you're not really leveraging a sort of balance wise, it's more getting the weight backwards, especially with how the main is. So I've been finding that's working quite well for me in these windy conditions, especially where there's a bit of a lumpiness. Obviously it's a reservoir, it's not that lumpy, but 600s are pretty wobbly, so it's quite nice to, like you see there, one foot on the rack to help me get some spread, but then instead of bending my knee, I've just got my knee straight rather than having to bend it and put it on the rack, and I found I had a lot more stability with it on the gunnel. So just something to bear in mind for others who maybe have difficulties in these windy, very broad reaches. Now, if it wasn't as windy, I'd probably put my foot on the rack, especially because I'd probably be a little bit further forwards. Now, here's the jive. Here's where I watched the lasers do it, and I thought, okay, I'll wait for a nice gap in the gusts. What could go wrong, you know? What could go wrong? Still got a fair bit of kicker on. Now, what happened here was I started turning and I didn't cross the boat at the same time. There was a minor delay. I don't know what happened, but the delay meant that I did not cross the boat quick enough and I had a swim. And annoyingly, the boat sort of death rolled as well, which, as you can see here, means that the boat's completely turtled, and now I've got a right challenge on my hands getting this back upright. And it's really quite hard to get these back upright from a turtle because you've got 12 meters squared of sail that's basically trying to push the water out of the way. And so you can see my feet are on the rack just trying to get some leverage. Now, annoyingly, the other boats in the single-handed fleet, the Hadron and the EPS, are starting to catch me up now. The Hadron is relatively new to the boat. He's still trying to get the right modes for the different conditions. I'd say he's pretty quick in the light stuff, but we haven't had much windy weather recently, so hasn't had a huge amount of opportunity to really practice and get tuned up for the windy stuff. So I think that was to my advantage, as I feel more tuned up for the windy weather, whereas I still feel like I'm trying to find the right gear for the lighter weather, especially with my weight of about 95 kilos. I must say, the capsize recovery's not been too slow, to be honest. Not bad going. As you can tell, there's the Hadron heading past me. I can't see the EPS, but Hadron is, going past, and I'm thinking, absolutely not. I'm not letting you go past me. I'm sheeting on and taking everything off so that I can get to this bottom mark before you. As you can see so the run was really nice, actually, and I found this in the first race, which was a bit of an awkward windward leeward. It was supposed to be a trapezoid, but the extra marks were sort of right next to each other, so it didn't really work out. It ended up being more like a very narrow trapezoid, where you could do the third and fourth mark in one go from the second mark. So, and the first and second mark were basically on the same bearing. So you ended up just not really bearing away at all around the windward. The windward was really the second mark. Anyway, because it was really windy in the 600, what I love about going downwind in a 600 is if you can get it going on the plane by going at a little bit of an angle to start with, you can start to bear off and then really soak low. And then I guess the thing I like to describe is how low do you go? How scared, or how brave are you feeling? And yeah, so the problem I've had before, I did this at the Tiger Trophy last year, I was going really, really well, and because the wind was sort of bending around the shore in front of the clubhouse, you were able to sort of go around what is supposedly a jibe mark to the next mark all in one go, taking that curve because of the wind curve, but also if you soaked it super low. And I managed to get pretty much to the last mark, and I knew I needed a jibe soon, but I was waiting for a good opportunity to do so, waiting for some boats to get past me. There was a musto coming past who ended up binning it, and then it jibed for me. That's the risk of going too low, is that it will jibe for you, and then before you know it, you are swimming. So you've got to take the risk. It's really good because you can travel practically straight at the mark, and then just head up a little bit just to get yourself back planing, so that when you can soak low. Now, something I do need to look into is obviously apparent wind is a big problem in the 600. Maybe I should be sheeting on a little bit downwind in these conditions. Maybe I'd go quicker. I don't know. I need to play around with that. We've got a windy Sunday coming up quite soon, so maybe I'll try some of that, and I can use the GPS data on my watch to help me figure out later, like if going downwind, sheeting on's quicker or not. I can have a little look in between races as well, see if there's any useful information I can get there for helping me at a championship. But the likelihood of us having a honking championship and actually go racing is probably quite slim, so bear that in mind. Now we're getting onto the second lap, which is also the last lap. I made a fatal mistake on this lap. After seeing how windy it was and also death rolling, I decided to play it safe. I decided to bang the right hand side. As you can see here, I'm comfortably going to make it through the start line, so I don't need to tack, which I think I did need to do in the first race to be able to get through the line, but it has shifted round. As a result of this, I go all the way to the trees, thinking that the trees will be less windy, but I'll have more control of the boat, and as a result, it will be easier for me to be able to keep the boat going nicely. And if you watch the 600 versus EPS video, you'll see that when I go to the left-hand side in that first lap, I am really struggling and I'm massively overpowered. Probably needed to do a few things to make my rig setup a little bit easier, but at the same time, and I probably need to nudge off a little bit too and head 5 degrees lower. But as you can see, the main is a horrible shape, and so in theory, I thought going towards the trees, which I definitely noticed in between races, if I headed off towards the west, because the wind's coming from sort of the south-ish, sort of southeast. If I headed off towards the west, sort of past the Fisherman's Lodge, I found myself nice and sheltered, meant I could have a drink, have a snack, generally just turn off a little bit, which I couldn't do sitting by the start line in the committee boat, because it was just far too bumpy and windy, whereas it was a little bit flatter over there, but also the trees were just helping just take the edge off those gusts. So I thought, well, being a little bit underpowered would maybe be a good idea. Now, if you see on the left there, all the lasers have gone left, like they did in the last lap. But the thing to bear in mind is all the lasers who normally sail full rigs and are similar weights to me, maybe a bit lighter, were all in radial rigs, and one of them was even in a 4.7 rig. And this is often a debate in the sailing community of, like, if you're sailing any normal boat which doesn't have multiple rig sizes, you go out in any condition, right, and you put up with it. Obviously, some boats like Scorpions and 5.0s, they have lots of raking systems, so you can rake on the water and effectively turn the boat into a completely different sailing style in, the pull of a string. Whereas some boats like a 600, it's not quite like that. I'm going to ignore the fact that the 600 does have a mast stump you can take out and you can use a smaller sail. My boat is not set up to use this. My shrouds are too long, my trapeze lines are too long, and I don't have the extra holes for them anymore because I don't actually have any white sails that are usable where I could roll them up and use them in the reefed form. I'd have to put one up the mast and leave the full rig in. So as far as I'm concerned, if I need to use the kiddie rig, I probably shouldn't be going sailing. Now, so you've got to bear that in mind. You've got these full-size adults using radial rigs, which I used to sail a radial quite a lot when I was a teenager. Yeah, I would love to use a 4.7 or a radial if I was having to hike. I obviously have the advantage of a trapeze. Some could say it might not be an advantage because it adds complexity, but it does mean I can keep the boat flatter for longer because I'm not having to use my core muscles quite in the same way as a laser sailor. There is nothing more painful than hiking on a laser. Now, as you can see, I'm getting closer and closer to those trees, and it's getting a little bit up and down already. It's very, very shifty. Maybe I should be playing the rudder a little bit harder here. But yeah, I'm deciding to go for a tack, especially because I'd rather do like 2 tacks. Ooh. I mean, it's not the worst tack I've ever seen. Like, I crossed the boat pretty quick. It's not the worst tack I've ever seen. But yes, as you can see, very up and down, and I'm not even that close to the trees. That is the funny thing about Grafham, is if you sail on a smaller reservoir like Pittsford, Bower Beach, anything like Oxford even, you're quite close to the edges to get a decent sized course. Grafham doesn't need that, but you still find that those shifts can be really horrible when you get, 100 meters or so from the shore. Okay, so I think I'm on the ley line, but I'm really struggling. I'm sort of playing this high mode because I'm fully expecting the gust, like the wind to shift or the gust to just be very weird and throw me in. I really wish I could keep the boat a little bit flatter, but as you can see, I'm being constantly knocked around here. And this is where I'm sitting there in my head thinking, I made a bad decision here. I should have tacked earlier, but I didn't really want to do 2 tacks or 3 tacks even to go halfway through the middle of the course. At the point I knew it was going to be a bad beat, it was kind of too late to do anything about it, and I had to just commit to going to the right-hand side. Obviously, I've had the advantage of clear air. There's one of the cats doing the windward leeward, and they were having the same problem as I was. I was watching them going up the beat thinking, they're constantly up and down, but they've got stabilizers, so at least it's a little bit more forgiving to them. And you'll actually see that one of the leading laser radials, who wasn't dramatically ahead of me at the start line, is actually, not dramatically behind me by the time I go around this windward mark, which you would go really a 920 handicap to what, like 1140? It's probably not quite right. I'm nearly there though at the windward mark now. We can't quite see the red yet, but you can see I'm going nearly past the cat park with the tall trees on the right hand side just behind me. That cat is going to have to do another couple of tacks though to make it round their windward mark, which was a little bit closer to the shore than our one. But yeah, you can start to see those lasers on the left, and I'm thinking, damn, definitely should have gone the other way. But at the same time, I still could have been very overpowered. It's worth noting, it's not a bad beat. Like, the boat's still moving very quickly, and my VMG was probably not too dissimilar to what I had in the first lap. So that was allowed me to actually win on handicap against the other boats in this fleet, which I think was there was a handful. I can't remember the full. This is the issue of sailing a fast boat, is you kind of lose track of what's behind you. Obviously, handicap racing is a controversial topic, but the benefit of handicap racing like this is the 600 does go a lot quicker compared to when there's less wind, but it's harder to sail. So it's almost if I win the race on handicap, it almost shows that I was able to keep the boat upright, apart from that very quick death roll, and I'm able to handle the power. A lot of people could sail it slower, right? They can, not power up quite as much on the reach like I am here. As you can see, I'm really going for it, which is really nice. But again, yeah, there's not always, it's not always easy to handle this power, and something I've learned a lot recently on these reaches is bearing away, especially with a square top. If you don't have enough kicker on, that square top sort of roach bit starts to sort of encourage the nose to go down and nosedive. And I actually saw this before Christmas, and I'll get that video out soon, where I was going really nicely, both feet on the rack. It was absolutely honking from the west, which meant that there were some big waves. And I was bearing away, but not quick enough. And if I had more kicker on, I probably would have been able to avoid the top of my square top from just nudging the front of my boat into the next wave. Even though I was basically as far back as I could be and down to the knot, there wasn't really much more I could do from a weight perspective to get the nose up. I think the main thing was that my kicker, which I was trying to do a little bit less on a reach, but actually kicker is really important on these really long, tall sails with a square top, because otherwise you're now just encouraging that top of the sail to, instead of knock you over sideways, it's knocking you forwards. So it's pretty windy here. I've gone past, it was F we were going around, not Z, sorry. Now, That's a bit of a code brown. I'm thinking this time I'm going to take it nice and easy for this jibe. No dramas. As you can see, I'm going quite low now. My wind finder is going all over the place. Not sure what's going on. The apparent wind is definitely starting to kick in here. I guess I could use the wind finder to help me find out what the apparent wind's doing. There we go. Much better. The key thing is I have to have my foot crossing the boat and pushing against the centerboard case before the boom comes across. And if I don't, then it's game over. Just straight up. There's no questions asked. It's game over. Bear that in mind if you're also someone who struggles with jibing a 600 in lots of breeze. Make sure you get your weight across and use that rack. I was actually talking to someone who sells a Musto who had a broken rack, and they did a race with only one rack. And they said the hardest part wasn't necessarily the fact that they didn't have it to trapeze on. It was when they did the jibes, they didn't have a rack to sort of fall onto. You know, the boats don't really have any sides, especially a Musto. It's very flat, and so you cross the boat into effectively nothing. It's really difficult, and I didn't realize it myself, but I actually throw myself across, specifically the tiller extension, and I lean on the tiller extension because it's stiff enough to allow that. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have the rack there. You saw that sort of perspective you don't really think about until, well, you don't have the resources to allow you. Now, it's getting pretty windy still. This is where everyone's thinking, you know what, we should probably call it a day and head in. I'm thinking, nah, we're only just getting started. But I am thinking, here we go. So I'm hooked on now, and I'm ready to head up around M to go through the finish. I think, to be honest, the reach and that run has probably helped me edge out on handicap. The beat wasn't the worst. I'd have to double check what my... I'll have a look now quickly. I wonder what the handicap actually, how close I was to being beaten by someone. I imagine it was fairly close. So the Hadron was about 1 minute 20 behind me in the end in that race, followed by the EPS, which was about another 10 or so seconds. So I was about a minute ahead, but I did finish on a lapse time 22 minutes, whereas they finished 26 and a half minutes-ish, roughly. So it kind of gives you a good perspective on... I have to be a fairly comfortable lead to beat them, and as you can see, my capsize, which didn't take very long, meant they could catch me up pretty quick. So, yeah, I wonder if I hadn't capsized, what would have happened, and maybe they had some capsizes too that I wasn't aware of. But yeah, this is... yeah, let me know what you think of the content, if you're enjoying the commentary. Oh yeah, I thought I'd try a nice broad reach after that finish. Yeah, gotta love a 600 on a reach. Very wet though, but yeah, let me know what you think of the commentary. I've got a few other videos lined up to come soon, including some stuff before Christmas. Might do some commentary on the Grafham Grand Prix and the Oxford Blue as well. Both events that didn't go particularly well for me, but maybe it's a good learning opportunity for me to figure out what I can work on this season to become a better sailor. So yeah, if you're curious, yeah, let me know.